Heal Necro has been a meme for all of Guild Wars 2 history. Well, it turns out that Support Scourge is the most overpowered build in the entire game. No other class can come close to the god tier recovery potential, group-wide condition cleanse and damage mitigation. This is the ultimate way to hard carry any raid group. Even if your teammates are determined to feed raid bosses, they will be powerless to stop you from brutally carrying them on your muscular necromancer back. Behold, the thinking man Scourge. Although it will of course work in any group, this build works perfectly in conjunction with another healer, especially a druid, as it won't interfere with celestial avatar generation too much, and it is a sustain type healer to complement the druid's burst healing. Thanks to 10 target spirits, buffs will also remain almost untouched. You can also solo heal every boss, even the tricky ones, as you will see over the course of the video. No boss is safe from Heal Necro. It struggles on none of them, and to be frank, the harder the encounter, the more it shines. You could consider this a bit overkill, but seeing as many groups run 2 druids anyway, replacing one with this will sacrifice a small amount of DPS, if any, while making the group and kill as secure as the probability of new mount skins. Let's get started with the gear. You'll want full Magi with Mercy runes for that extra resurrection magic. The true power of these runes will be revealed later. Mercy runes are also liars. They don't actually give toughness while reviving at all. They in fact grant 25% damage reduction, so you don't have to worry about stealing the boss's attention. The weapons of choice for the Thinking Man Scourge are a main hand dagger combined with a torch and warhorn. A focus may be employed if CC is not needed or if boon removal is. Sigils are very straightforward, transference and water for maximum healing output. Food is also a simple choice. Delicious rice balls increase healing and barriers, while sharpening skulls will buff players we revive with extra damage to compensate for their loss in DPS uptime. Sharpening skulls can, very rarely, cause toughness problems if you resurrect the off-chrono and their toughness is too close to the tanks, so you can swap this food for bountiful maintenance oil if these issues arise, but it really is very uncommon. For trait lines, select Soul Reaping, Blood Magic, and Scourge. In Soul Reaping, Gluttony generates more life force to spam shade skills harder, Unyielding Blast will apply copious amounts of vulnerability, which is often overlooked and can sometimes be an issue if few sources are present in the group. With this trait, however, that will not be the case. Vital Persistence is an incredibly strong trait. Not only does it grant some free vitality for more life force, it also reduces the cooldown on all shade skills by 20%, greatly increasing supportive power. Strength of Undeath cements Soul Reaping's power, increasing a Necromancer's life force pool by 15% and a small damage increase. Once again, as life force gain is percentile and shade skills are a fixed cost, Strength of Undeath combined with Vital Persistence, dagger auto attacks, and a massive health pool will make sure you never run out of fuel. Blood is where the magic really happens. Ritual of Life will cause a well of blood to be summoned when beginning to revive. The well instantly heals the Scourge for nearly 6,000 and pulses for over 1,000 on allies. On top of all that, wells of blood will revive all downed allies for 7% per pulse, for a total of 35% on 5 allies. Bear in mind that healing modifiers also affect this, so this actually ends up as 8.4% per pulse, for a total of 42%, thanks to healing food and a transference sigil. If Well of Blood doesn't seem disgusting enough, then look no further than Transfusion, which will cause Garish Pillar to teleport all downed allies to the Necromancer and revive them for 2% per pulse. This is absolutely insane when combined with Ritual of Life, as it will group up all downed allies so the Well of Blood can revive all of them extremely quickly. Transfusion ticks 9 times for a total 18% revival on 5 targets. This means that on the absurdly low cooldown of 12 seconds, 9.6 with Alacrity, you can save up to 5 allies from an untimely demise with relative ease. Mercy runes really shine here, as anyone you touch with your transfusion or wells count as being revived by you and will get picked back up at 80% HP instead of 50. Think about it as healing players for 30% of their maximum health when you revive them. Transfusion also heals the Necromancer and nearby allies for 960 per second, and with Alacrity, it's possible to have this powerful passive sustain up almost the entire time. This, combined with Barrier, is where the healing strength of the Thinking Man Scourge originates. Another incredibly useful trait is Last Rites. It stops players in the Necromancer subgroup from bleeding out, making them easier to revive and also less likely to die, which is always a plus. Last Rites also increases healing power the lower HP the Necromancer is, which can certainly come in handy in clutch situations, especially as it always grants a base 150. Finally, in Blood, we have Vampiric Presence. With it, our subgroup will drain life with nearly every strike. It may not seem like much, but it will certainly add up. Healing for 89 every half second is nothing to be sniffed at, especially considering that it doubles when the Necromancer is in Shroud, and with Alacrity, it turns out we'll be in Shroud about 50% of the time too. This source of lifesteal ends up restoring about 200 HP per second to each player in the group on average. Combined with Transfusion, Support Scourge restores around 1000 hit points per second to its entire subgroup every second, and that's not even including Barrier yet. The last trait of note in Blood Magic is Vampiric. It is a simple lifesteal effect with no cooldown that only affects the Necromancer. Added up with Vampiric Presence, mass personal barrier from Shroud, and very fast attacks, it renders the Thinking Man's Scourge extremely durable, ensuring that you'll survive to scrape your team off the floor when they fall over. Last but certainly not least, we arrive at Scourge, which as you might expect is the key to opening the door into the terrifying world of Heal Necro. First, Scourge removes the conventional Death Shroud mechanic and replaces it with Shade skills, all of which are very useful to our cause. Going through the traits slightly backwards here makes the most sense, so first up is Sand Savant, which reduces the cooldown on Sand Shade to 10 seconds, increases the radius to 360, target cap to 5, and sets the maximum shade count to 1, although for the purposes of other Scourge traits, the singular Big Shade counts as 3. This is probably the most important trait in the entire build, as it not only allows us to move our shade around very easily and cover our entire party, it also causes us to have a target cap of 10 for every shade skill, so no matter the subgroup, the glory of sand will cover everyone. Desert Empowerment is up next, and it will cause summoning our shade to apply a barrier to 5 targets for about 2,500. As Shade has a mere 8-second cooldown with Alacrity, this can be considered as about 300 HP per second on 5 players, which is fairly strong, especially when used preemptively to counter damage. It's worth noting that because Sandshade has a 900 range and large radius, you can spot heal players at a long range very easily. The final major trait enhances the support of Barrier. Abrasive Grit empowers Barrier to remove a condition and apply 2 might stacks. The might is fairly incidental, it'll fill in the gaps as they arise, but the condition cleanse is awesomely powerful. Summoning a shade will cleanse a condition on 5 targets, Sand Cascade will remove 1 from up to 10 targets, on an extremely low cooldown too. The sheer strength of the condition management from this trait in Nefarious Favor cannot be understated. Heal Scourge will protect your entire raid from the evils of debilitating ailments. The remaining minor traits in Scourge are also quite powerful, although not that important for the functioning of this build. Blood to Sand will grant a 15% damage reduction while the Big Shade exists, which is of course the same as permanent. With Protection, this means the Necromancer will take a mere 56% damage. Potent damage reduction and a health pool of 30,000 ensures that even if everyone else is dead, Heal Scourge will remain standing. Sand Sage functions similarly, increasing condition duration and boon duration by 15%, as long as Big Shade is manifested. More might output can sometimes be handy, especially if you wanted to try say a Plague Doctor variant of this build, and condition duration is similar, although even with Magi it will still increase vulnerability duration from Unyielding Blast and Immobilize from Dagger. As a quick aside, although you can play a whole bunch of gear variants for a Heal Necro to increase damage output or might output, I don't think it's efficient to do this, and I prefer going for a pure, dedicated support build. However, other options such as Martial can be very effective too. Now that traits have been dealt with, it is time to learn about the toolkit of the Thinking Man's Scourge, starting with Shade skills. Nefarious Favor is a 4-second cooldown ability that costs 1,935 life force. It converts 1 condition on each target into a boon. Thanks to Sand Savant, this means healing Necro has an ironically repulsive amount of condition management from this ability alone. Sand Cascade is the Scourge's main source of barrier. With full Magi, the Sands will shield up to 10 targets for nearly 4,000, and with a low cost and cooldown of 2,487 life force and 8 seconds respectively, with Alacrity, this is a potential healing output of over 6,000 per second, which is absolutely disgusting. Thanks to Abrasive Grit, Sand Cascade will also remove a condition and apply might to all of those affected, further increasing the build's already considerable cleanse capabilities. But the true crown and glory of the Thinking Man's Scourge is without a doubt Garish Pillar. Activating this ability fears enemies near the Shade and the Necromancer, but far more importantly triggers Transfusion, which will immediately pull all downstate players to the Necromancer and begin reviving them as mentioned before. This is the source of godlike recovery power that will carry any team to victory. All this for the low price of 3,685 life force. Garage Pillar combined with Transfusion is quite possibly the strongest support ability in the game currently, and it is not even close. No other skill can touch the ability to secure easy revives and move down players out of harm's way every 10 seconds. One note about Transfusion is that you can actually teleport individual down players twice during a single transfusion. The port has a 5-second cooldown per player, so as long as you pull them near the start, you'll pull them again after a while. The final shade skill is SHROUD for 4,606 life force, and with a fairly short 16-second cooldown, damage will pulse around the Scourge and the big shade, in addition to the player gaining a large barrier. It might not seem too impressive, but traits make this worth using on cooldown. Healing and damage from Vampiric Presence are both doubled during the 7-second Shroud, a surprising increase in sustain if your team can keep attacking, because with Alacrity, Shroud uptime is in fact about 50%. Death Perception will also be active during Shroud, which will cap out critical strike chance for extra big numbers. So SHROUD is a powerful ability that can be used to survive with personal barrier, but would also spammed off cooldown for a healing and DPS increase for the group. It's worth noting that thanks to Unyielding Blast, mashing all shade skills can apply about 15 stacks of vulnerability on the target, which is not to be sniffed at, as some compositions may lack this key debuff. Moving on to weapons, the main hand is always going to be Dagger, and the reason for this is because of its very strong life force generation on auto attack. Completing a chain will generate 8.8%, heavily weighted towards the final strike, so it's important to finish it. Life Siphon is not that useful, but it's a surprisingly strong heal for yourself if you need it. Dark Pact is a single target immobilize and boon rip with a short 15-second cooldown. It can come in very handy in specific situations, particularly when dealing with adds in boss fights that need to be controlled. Warhorn and Torch serve similar purposes, provide a bit of extra life force, and more importantly, strong crowd control abilities. Both have a 2-second disable, a daze and a knockdown respectively. A strong contribution to dealing with break bars. Oppressive Collapse has the added bonus of stacking Might on your party, applying 2 stacks per condition on your opponent. This will probably end up as around 20 stacks or more most of the time, but should mostly be safe for CC. If CC isn't needed or you want even more life force, vulnerability and boon rip, grab a Focus for Spinal Shivers and Reaper's Touch. Utility skills are a little more complicated. Of course, we always want Well of Blood for more supreme revive power and group healing, Flesh Golem for free DPS and very strong break bar damage, and Signet of Undeath for emergency resurrection and passive life force generation. The remaining 2 slots are pretty situational, and there are multiple good options. When playing this build, as the name Thinking Man's Scourge suggests, it's best to customize on an encounter by encounter basis. Boon Rip is easily obtainable from Well of Corruption or Corrupt Boon, mobility from Sandswell, Spectral Walk or Fleshworm, additional add control and CC from Spectral Grasp or Spectral Wall, extra life force from Desiccate, a stun break and some team stability from Trail of Anguish, or even projectile destruction from Corrosive Poison Cloud. The possibilities are truly endless, but all slightly lukewarm, as the Necromancer utilities are quite underwhelming for support, so don't worry about it too much. Extra minions should be avoided, as they will in fact steal barrier from your allies sometimes, and that is simply a waste. Now that that's out of the way, let's look at how to play the most overpowered build in raiding history. A key part of this is to not run out of fuel. Try to land dagger or attacks as much as possible to keep life force generation strong, and use whatever life force skills you have, such as offhand abilities or utility skills, to make sure you will always be ready to spring into action. Prioritizing revive abilities is simple but important. Transfusion should pretty much always be used to revive allies. After that will of course appear the Ritual of Life Well of Blood. This one can't really be controlled because just a single F press will trigger it, so you won't always get perfect value, but that's okay. You'll want to save your heal skill Well of Blood for when you don't have the revive trait and you need to revive multiple players. Single reses don't usually require usage of this skill, as Mercy Runes will typically be enough to ensure a speedy recovery. However, if you need to get an important target up, like a tank, druid, handkiter, or anything pivotal to the fight, just go crazy and drop everything. If the situation is truly dire and you are the last Scourge standing, then unload everything. Transfusion, Traded Well of Blood, Heal Well of Blood, and you can easily revive your entire squad in double quick time. Signet of Undeath is a last resort triple revive to be used if no wells are available. Transfusion allies to you then cast the Signet. It may appear to be a slow cast time, but with quickness it's really not that bad. Even without, it's better than nothing. What is really important in all these actions is to be decisive. The sooner you get someone up, the less likely the situation can snowball, so be attentive and use the resources you have to make recovery swift. A general guide for shade abilities is as follows. Mash everything really hard. Now this is an oversimplification of course, and there is some finesse, but because of how low the cooldowns are, you can be quite liberal with their usage. Make sure you always have a shade up on your team, as otherwise you're wasting half of your potential, and that's no good. Try not to overuse it though, as you'll want to try to always have your group in its gritty embrace. Be prepared for any sudden repositioning. Bear in mind, your shade abilities cast around your shade and you, so you can spread around your support by being in a different place to your shade, or of course placing the shade away should the need arise. Don't be afraid to use the shade to spot barrier or cleanse though. You can easily save players from afar. Note that if you cast shade skills while summoning a shade, this will still cast the skill even if no shade is present when the cast is triggered. This allows you to sort of cancel the half-second delay, or rather you can have the delay running at the same time as the shade summon cast time. Predicting incoming damage is something that the very nature of barrier inherently rewards. So be aware of mechanics and use Sand Cascade to negate them, even if your allies are intent on using their faces as a shield. You can also precast Well of Blood on your group and combine this with Transfusion if you're expecting some heavy group pressure to come through. The two combined are a long duration and very powerful sustained heal. Remember also that Well of Blood is ranged. You can use it to keep an ally from bleeding out long enough to be transfused or simply revived. This point is where the thinking comes in. While playing this build, you should constantly be trying to predict the future and what you're going to do to fix it. For example, ask yourself, if 3 players downstate in the next 10 seconds, what tools will I have to deal with this? Is the res trait available? Can I get in a position preemptively to pull them all together? Can I prevent any of them from going down with barrier or healing? If I use everything, will I run out of life force? You get the idea. Although I said spam everything, always try to predict when you're definitely going to need something and plan accordingly. A great example of this would be out-healing Veil Guardian greens. You know for sure when damage is coming, so save barrier for the detonation and use Transfusion and Shroud a few seconds before to heal everyone up. This sort of planning will not only prevent most downstates, but also because Transfusion will already be running, you don't even have to react to them, because Transfusion will do it for you and bring them right over. Always remember the teleport on Transfusion, and consider that it will port any and all downed allies you go near while Transfusion is up. So you can group up downed allies even if they are distant from each other before reviving them all at once with wells. The last thing that any beefy support can do is something a little less elegant. Because of a very large health pool, including barrier and some damage reduction, you can stand in the fire for those that cannot. Do not be afraid to take a bit of damage using your positioning to save your allies from the same. A great example of this would be Matthias. Standing in danger fields while the team needs to spread is no real threat to you, but it certainly is to a squishy DPS player. With all this knowledge on your side, you won't be able to wipe in raids anymore even if you really try. Now go forth and show the world that Necromancer does indeed have a support role, and fitting with the theme of the class, it is a very selfish one. The thinking man's Scourge really doesn't care about the team. They are mere implements to get what the Necromancer wants, even if it means placing them all on your back and throwing them over the finish line. Thanks for watching. I had a lot of fun playing around with variants of Heal Necro, so feel free to go a bit wild. One of the best things about this build is that there are plenty of gear types and styles you could try and still maintain the core effectiveness. Now get out there and spread the word that the one-man carry brigade has arrived.